Welcome into this week's episode of Three True Values. I'm your host, James Fletcher, and we are back to talk all things college basketball. It's a busy time of year. As we get into late November, this is where the calendar starts to pick up just a little bit. Last week we talked about the Champions Classic. Now we approach Thanksgiving, which of course means that we're getting ready for more MTEs. We're going to see teams in Maui, teams in Atlantis, teams all across the globe. Las Vegas with a big event now, where NIL is connected to the event itself. Something new in this era of college basketball that we will experience for the first time. So a lot of good matchups is what's going to come out of that, some of which we don't even know yet, which makes it that little bit more exciting. Today, though, in the first segment, we're going to talk about two teams that had 1-1 weeks. We're going to talk about Purdue, who beat Alabama and then lost a game to Marquette. We'll get into both of those games, what I saw from the Boilermakers, and then we'll talk about Alabama, who, of course, lost to Purdue, but then bounced back on Wednesday night with a big win on a neutral site, but in the state of Alabama, so a friendly confine there against Illinois, despite Mark Sears not scoring a single point, just the second time in his college career that has happened. We will talk about those two teams and what we learned, despite them going 1-1 over the course of the last 7 days. Then, in the second segment, when we come back, we'll get you prepped for some of these MTEs, what's going to be going on around the country, what they mean, some of what's on the line. This is the time of year when it gets a little bit confusing because, sure, you want to win as many games on the schedule as possible, but sometimes when you're playing two, possibly three top 25 teams within the span of 2-3 days, something that college basketball teams just aren't typically built to do, maybe you go 2-1, and it's not the worst thing for you. You can sometimes even move up in the rankings depending on who it is that you're able to beat in the course of those games. So we'll talk about those MTEs and what to expect. And then, as always, in that third segment, we will wrap things up by giving you the games of the week, taking you through all the games you need to watch over the next 7 days. Before I forget as well, we will have a podcast next week. It will be recorded on Wednesday night. I have not decided for sure if it will be released Wednesday or Thursday. Of course, with Thanksgiving coming up, maybe you want to listen to it on your way to wherever you're having your Thanksgiving celebration. Maybe you want it for the car ride back. Either way, we'll figure that out and get it up to you. Just too much basketball to talk about to not record, honestly, one on next week. So without further introduction here, let's get into it. Let's talk about the big games of the week. It, of course, started with Alabama and Purdue going head-to-head in Mackey, which a great home environment for the Boilermakers, who pull out an 87-78 victory over the Crimson Tide, knocked Alabama down in the polls. Purdue had a little surge. They end up in the top 10. Now, Trey Kaufman ring. You can't say enough about what he was able to do. His ability to get to the post and really work over that Alabama front court, which includes Clifford Omari. I'm getting used to that pronunciation. It has been relayed to me how it is pronounced. Grant Nelson, Aiden Sherrill. I mean, that's a good front court there that Alabama has, and he really put in work against it. Had a big performance, 26 points on 23 shots. Alabama, not as efficient as you probably would have liked. The bright spot for them was Phylon, who I thought had a really good game, has really continued to emerge and establish himself as a guy who's not just a freshman guard who was a late addition to the class and kind of got thrown in. He is a real part of this rotation and could find himself, we'll talk about it here in a couple of weeks, but could find himself very firmly on NBA draft radars if he keeps up performances like this. But let's focus on Purdue because I was wrong in the preseason, even early in the season. I have said multiple times, whether it was in the Big Ten preview that we did, whether it was in my offseason rankings, which did not include Purdue among the top teams in the country. At any point during this offseason, I have been a little bit skeptical of their ability to continue to be a dominant team in college basketball. Yes, I know that they're still not that number one team in the country, a top 4 or 5 team without Zach Edey, but they still are a top 25 team who, when playing in the right environment, when they get the right production from their guys, can beat anyone in the country. They proved that in this game against Alabama. CJ Cox, a freshman, had a big performance down the stretch. I thought he really was kind of that catalyst, that difference maker that you have to have if you're going to pull off an upset. He gave them a big performance. We know about Braden Smith. We know how good he is. Just all around game from the Purdue point guard. And then just that depth that they throw at you, and they're not heralded guys. It's not Alabama where it's, we bring in a few of these 5 stars and a few of these top transfers and a few guys coming back from last year's Final Four team. That's not what this Purdue team is really made up of. It's a lot of guys who fill the role that they're supposed to fill, and they do their job, and they go out there and they play well together. And I've had questions about how well it would mesh, but they really, really proved the proof of concept that Matt Painter has that squad ready to go, that they will be a top 10, at worst top 15 team throughout the course of this season. In my opinion, I think that they move right up to the top. If you're talking about Big Ten standings, Big Ten teams who can compete for that conference title, I don't know if I would put anyone above them at this point in the season. But they did play a second game this week over the past 7 days, and it was a loss against Marquette. A road game, so you get to see what they're able to do at home. They knock off Alabama. They go on the road. They lose to Marquette. Now, Marquette I have been a little bit higher on than quite a few people that I know. I liked what they had returning. I thought Cam Jones would be able to fill in just seamlessly there. Taking over more responsibility as a scorer, as a facilitator as well. Did not know he was going to be able to put up a triple-double, the first in Marquette history since Dwayne Wade over 20 years ago, and just the third all-time in program history. So a big night from Cam Jones, led Marquette past Purdue, but also David Joplin. They've got Ben Gold. They've got this kind of proof of concept, and Stevie Mitchell is really a difference maker because, yes, they lose Tyler Kolek. Cam Jones has to shoulder a lot of the offensive load, but what Stevie Mitchell brings is just all the intangibles. He gets you into your plays. He makes the right pass. He's a great defender. And so he really complements Cam Jones well, I think, in that backcourt. Cam Jones, another guy who we're going to look at it sometimes through this NBA draft lens, and he's a guy who, if his measurements come out right, he could find himself definitely in the second round of next year's draft and could very well play himself if he continues to play like this, putting up triple doubles, showing his abilities to work as a lead guard and off the ball. He could rise his stock quite a bit over these next few months. But Purdue, they struggled. They end up not getting that big performance from the role players. You don't get that big CJ Cox performance. Trey Kaufman-Renn, it was a different game. And I'm not exactly sure what prevented him from getting into the post spots as much as he needed to throughout the course of the game, but he just wasn't down there as much. It wasn't as dominant of a performance for him on offense, and that led to them having to get shots from other areas. Braden Smith having to create a lot more within the offense, and it just was not enough on that night against a really good Marquette team. I don't think it diminishes what I think about Purdue after that Alabama win. It's just a loss on the record, and another data point, and something that they now can go back. They have the tape against another top team in college basketball that they can watch and improve from. So I think a good, not a good result for Purdue, but a good week for Purdue overall, getting that win against Alabama and then competing because it was a real game throughout the course of the night against Marquette. I think that'll be big for them as they move forward and play more and more big games throughout the course of the season. Alabama, on the other hand, they take the loss in that first game. They bounce back with a win against Illinois, 100-87, the final there on Wednesday night. Now, Mark Sears did not score a point, 0 for 5 from the field, and sat on the bench for a large majority of that second half as things came down the stretch. And this game was not completely out of reach. This was not a 20-point lead that came down to 13. This sat right around 10, 8 points for large stretches of it, and then ballooned up to 13 at the end. So interesting choice by Nate Oates. We'll see how it plays out because I don't think there's really any question. Mark Sears is in a little bit of a slump. Went 5 for 15 from the field against Purdue, and then 0 for 5. So shooting 25% from the field. His three is just not falling down right now. He had 15 points in that Purdue game, so he found ways to be involved, but this one, of course, 0. So this is what comes, though, with Alabama's depth. And at least on the court in this particular game, Nate Oates had the hot hand in Aiden Holloway. He was knocking down threes, hit all 3 of his first attempts from deep. He was also a lot more off the bounce, getting to the rim, creating a little bit. He was very active on the offensive end. And then LeBaron Filan, who has really, really emerged. I talked about him, his impact in that Purdue game, had 18 points in that one. Again, in double digits with a really good, solid all-around performance. I mean, this guy, he crashes the boards. He jumps up. He's getting rebounds. He's got assists. He competes on defense. He can shoot the ball a little bit. I really like what LeBaron Filan brings and think that he might be, and we'll see as the season continues here, because I think Darian Reed has a chance. Mark Sears is not going to be the highest rated NBA draft prospect, but Grant Nelson has a chance to continue to grow his stock. He had a big performance in this one, although he's got those ups and downs even within a game. I think in this game, perfect example. He comes out, he hits 3 of his first 4 threes. He's up there, 20 points in the game. And then he airballs one down the stretch that you're like, what? This is how is that the same guy that I've been watching this entire time? But he needs to clean some of that up. Mark Sears, it's just physical. Like, he's just a small guard. It's hard to make it in the NBA as a small guard. But Filan a little bit bigger, a little bit more athletic, and I think has a chance to be the top-rated Alabama player on NBA draft boards very soon if he continues to perform like this. And he'll have plenty more chances with the strength of schedule that they have put together in this non-conference portion of the season. So you've got the on-court side where you can play those two, and of course Latrell Wrightsell as well, who had another solid just role player performance. I mean, that's what he does. He's really good at what he does. But on the court is one. In the locker room, between games, over the course of a season, that's where you have to make sure that your culture is rock solid. And I don't say this to say anything negative about Mark Sears. I say this to point out human nature and a fact. He looked down on the bench. He did not look happy to be on the bench. Rightfully so for a preseason player of the year candidate who has 0 points and is not going in the game while watching a transfer sophomore and a true freshman, play down the stretch. A true freshman who wasn't even in the program until very late in the offseason. So understandable for him to be down. I'm not even mad at the body language. We can sit here and critique it, but there's no point. Yes, he was down because he wasn't in the game, in a big game, in front of a big audience. So what does that mean tomorrow? Tonight? Is Mark Sears ingrained enough in the culture? Does he trust his coach enough that he knows next game the slate is wiped clean, he's the starting point guard, he can go out and score 25 points? Does he have that belief in himself, in the coaching staff? Do the people around him have that faith in everyone involved to not be in his ear? Those are the things that happen when you've got a team this deep. And it's a good problem to have because you've got the depth to overcome a shooting slump or injuries or whatever the case is throughout the course of the season. You've got the depth to deal with it. But depth also means that not everyone is going to be happy every night with how much they played, how many points they scored, when they were in the game. It's just going to happen. It's a fact of basketball. And I don't think that guard is even the position where it's going to happen the most often. Those wings are going to have to figure things out. Chris Youngblood is coming back. The AAC Player of the Year last year is joining this wing group that already has several good players who are able to make an impact. And they're playing three guards a lot of times. How's that going to be impacted when there's more wings to throw into the rotation? This is all stuff that'll play out throughout the course of the year. We're going to see how he manages it, does Nate Oates. And I do think this next game will be telling. How does Mark Sears come out? And even if he's still in a slump, because shooting slumps, look, they come, they go. I have no doubt that he's going to come back and going to perform, but I can't tell you for sure it's going to be next game. But how does he look from the start? Does he look engaged? Does he look like he trusts himself? Does he look like he's playing to make sure he doesn't get subbed out? Those are the things to look out for in Alabama's next game as they come off of this big win. Because we know they can pick up these big wins. And we know they're going to pick up several of these big wins across the course of their schedule. They're going to be one of the top teams in college basketball. But if you want to be a national champion, it's the little things. Little things like this are what are going to make it. So if you're an Alabama fan and you see an engaged Mark Sears, you see a Mark Sears who's leading on the court, who is, just engaged and part of everything going on, it will not only be a sigh of relief, but it'll also be a big sign of encouragement for what it means come February and March, maybe even into April. On the other side, we will talk about the MTEs coming up over the course of the next week right here on 3 True Values. Welcome back in to 3 True Values as we keep the show rolling here today. We're talking about the MTEs that occur throughout the next week or so. We've got 3 of them that we're going to touch on in this segment that I think are stand out above the rest as important to not only the college basketball landscape, but what it could be come February and March, of course, as these teams show what their resume is. This is the non-conference schedule. This is your best chance to pick up some big wins. So we'll start in the Players Era Festival in Las Vegas, a new event for those of you who might be wondering what this is. It is an NIL-based tournament that has been started. There's going to be some NIL funds allocated to the champion, to the teams that come in and participate. And so 8 teams involved in this tournament: Houston, Alabama, Rutgers, Notre Dame, San Diego State, Creighton, Oregon, and Texas A&M. So some really good teams in that field who will have a chance to show what they've got and also come away with some money. So a really cool opportunity here in Las Vegas over the next week. Now, it's also not your traditional bracket format that you see in these MTEs. So let me break it down just a little bit for you. We've got 2 sides of the bracket. One side features Houston, Alabama, Rutgers, and Notre Dame. Each team will play 2 games. So Alabama will play Houston and Rutgers. Notre Dame will play Rutgers and Houston, etc. The mixing, matching there, you can figure out from there. And then, whichever team is first, after that's sort of pool play, so to speak, those 2 games instead of 3. So we're not going to see every team match up. So point differential, different tiebreakers will come into it. The champion of that group will play in the championship game on the final day, that being Saturday of next week. So we'll go through the big games next week, but the first round, this pool play portion of the event, is on Tuesday and Wednesday. So I want to break it down right now. On the other side of the bracket, San Diego State will play Creighton, and then Oregon. Texas A&M will play Oregon, and then Creighton. Like I said, if you need more info on who's playing who on which day on which part of the bracket, you can look it up wherever you get your scores, and just Google the Players Era tournament, to be quite honest, because it is not the easiest thing to sit here and explain like some of these other tournaments. But yes, whoever finishes first out of that side will compete against whoever finishes first on the other side. Same goes for second, third, and fourth. So they're going to play for every spot in this tournament. Each team will come away from this playing 3 games. It does look like on paper, one side of the bracket is a little bit better than the other. Obviously, Alabama and Houston being on one side of the bracket, they will play each other. So we could very well on day 1 have a good idea of who's going to play in that championship game on the other side, but not a sure thing, because Rutgers with Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper don't want to count them out for sure, and they get to play Alabama in that second game. So we'll see how it all shakes out and how it mixes and matches over the course of the next week. And like I said, we'll talk about that championship day on the next episode. Next, we have the battle for Atlantis, which is historically one of the biggest events in this week of college basketball. This year, Louisville will face Indiana in the first round. The winner of that game will face the winner of West Virginia against Gonzaga. I think Gonzaga will be pretty heavy favorites there. On the bottom of the bracket, Oklahoma facing Providence. Providence, a team that I have been much higher on than what the metrics say, than what some of the rankings have said to this point. But they're undefeated, and I think they've played decently well. There's definitely room for improvement there. I think this is a team that's kind of finding its form. But against Oklahoma, a good challenge. And then on the bottom of that bracket, the winner of Providence, Oklahoma, will play the winner of Davidson and Arizona. So a good opportunity in that second round as well for whichever of those teams comes out to get a real test against Arizona. So this event is going to be a fascinating one, because while I think Gonzaga will be the heavy favorite to come out of this 3-0, you've got Arizona. You've got those 2 teams that I just discussed who are going to be in play at least for an NCAA tournament spot, at least this early in the season. You've got Louisville with a real chance to kind of establish that, hey, we know Kentucky has kind of established themselves here, and we know that we're the team that was rebuilding, but like we've arrived. We're here. We're competing for an NCAA tournament spot. This is a real statement game for Louisville, a statement weekend, really. It could be no matter which way that first game goes, because Gonzaga plays West Virginia, who is also trying to kind of kickstart the program under Darian DeVries. Then, the Maui Invitational. Of course, this is the big headline event every year around the Thanksgiving holiday. And it's no different this year. We start off with UConn facing Memphis. Memphis, of course, we've talked about on this podcast, the rough or turbulent, at least, offseason that they've had. It extended early into the season. But with that said, they have performed really well so far on the floor. They have looked really good. PJ Haggerty has been outstanding. He has gotten to the free throw line. He has shot the ball much better than he has in his career to this point. And that backcourt with Haggerty and Tyrese Hunter is really, really good. If they can get the shooting around it, if that kind of sticks, if they can be this good of a shooting team, they will be a real force to be reckoned with. And look, more so in Maui than in any of these tournaments, I think you've got a real opportunity to be that team. I talked about it in the first segment. That team that goes 2-1 and still goes up in the rankings, right? Because on the other side of the bracket here from Memphis and UConn is Colorado and Michigan State. And I've poked holes in Michigan State, and you all know that I'm not a big fan of Colorado. So then you look at the bottom of the bracket, Auburn against Iowa State. So we're talking about a top 5 team in the country is going to be in the losers bracket for sure. We already know that because Auburn and Iowa State will face each other. The winner of that will face the winner of Dayton and North Carolina. Dayton has looked really good. They are a really, really good A-10 team. I think they're the favorite in that conference, and I think they're a team that could sneak around and be in the mix for an at-large bid if they can put together 1 or 2 wins this weekend. The wins that you can pick up in Maui will do wonders if you're a Dayton or if you're a Memphis, a team that might be in a 1-bid conference. Making sure that you're above the cut line, even as the favorite in that conference, making sure you're above that cut line, whether you win the conference tournament or not, is huge for these types of teams. And this is your best chance to pick up that quad 1 win that the committee looks at in March and says, we got to keep them in because their net ranking is so high. Their KenPom ranking, their T rank, all of those things are so high. Strength of record. They're so high because they've got this boost coming here from the Maui Invitational and what they were able to do. So big weekend specifically for those teams because they don't get the same opportunities in the conference schedule these other ones will get. We'll talk more about what has happened and what will be happening as we know they go throughout the course of the next week. So we will have more to talk about next week on the podcast with these games right here on 3 True Values. But when we come back, we've got the games of the week. Don't miss it on the other side. Welcome back into the last segment here on 3 True Values, running you through the games of the week. Going to start out with Thursday, that being tonight. Tennessee playing Virginia. We've got some other games that we could watch, but teams that we've seen before or that we just watched recently. I think Tennessee and Virginia. How about this Virginia team? No Tony Bennett. He retires in the offseason. Strange circumstances there. Now his assistant takes over, and they're undefeated. Now, have they played the toughest schedule? No, but they're undefeated, and, there's always hope when you're undefeated. So could Virginia sneak up and surprise people? This would be their opportunity to really make a statement, but I wouldn't count on it. But worst case scenario, it's a good chance to watch Tennessee and see how that offense is clicking under Rick Barnes. On Friday, we've got Duke and Arizona. We can see Cooper Flagg against Carter Bryant, an interesting matchup there. And then, of course, just 2 top teams in college basketball this season. On Saturday, we've got Cincinnati and Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, a team that probably not going to be quite on the bubble, but a team that can challenge Cincinnati, that can be a real test for the Bearcats there. So I want to check that one out and see how they handle that. On Sunday, we've got St. John's and Georgia. St. John's becoming one of our go-to Sunday teams, it appears. Georgia, another one of those teams that maybe they're on the bubble, maybe they're not, but they've got talent on that roster. I like some of the transfer additions. I like some of the freshmen that they brought in. Even some of the returning players I'm a fan of there. So it'll be interesting to see. Can they hang around with St. John's? Can they make this game interesting? Because if they can, I think it kind of changes the way that we view them. Maybe they move into that bubble conversation just a little bit more than they are right now. Then on Monday, we've got, I mentioned it earlier, Auburn against Iowa State. This is the standout matchup in the first round of any of these tournaments, any of these MTEs. Auburn, Iowa State is the one you're going to want to watch. A top 5 showdown there at a neutral site. So it's going to be huge for whichever team can pull out the win. Auburn, of course, already has a win over Houston at this point in the season. Iowa State will be looking for their first big statement of the year. On Tuesday, we've got Duke and Kansas. I mean, you can't turn down Duke and Kansas as your game of the day. It doesn't really matter what else is going on, but that is a real showdown between those two. Well, it'll be the biggest test that Kansas has faced so far. Can the Jayhawks remain undefeated? Can they stay at number 1 in the rankings? We've seen pretty much every time somebody's dropped a game, they've dropped significantly to this point in the standings. How does that happen if they drop that one there against Duke? And then on Wednesday, we've got Alabama against Rutgers. Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper against what I described earlier in the show as the deepest team in college basketball. I think we'll learn a lot about both Alabama's ability to deal with star players, guys who have real high levels of talent, and what Rutgers can do when they have to take that step up in competition. Can those two young guys really lead a team to the kind of success that they need to have to make a big run later in the season? Of course, they've got time to grow, and that's what's so important about this game, is that they're going to learn. Do they have it right now? What does that feel like if they do have it? Or if they don't, how do we get there? How do we use this to motivate us, to drive us to continue to get better? Regardless of what the results are, we'll have plenty to talk about this time next week right here on 3 True Values. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, James Fletcher.